welcome you for being here all together in just one family, just one tribe. We want to do, to put our best intentions that we're carrying within our hearts from Yucatan Peninsula, from the heart of the jungle, and from
Uganda.
From Uganda. We want to make the opening of this meeting by making a salutation, as we used to do on all our ceremonies on the Mayan communities. And also, this is like mandatory every single morning to remind us that life is a sacred space and time for all of us, and that we are totally linked, connected with Mother Earth and with all the elements of nature and every single living being. So to do this, we're gonna make an opening call for the elementary energies of the planet and universe. And it is that we're gonna move to every single cardinal point. But we ask you, please, to be with us on this salutation. So this implies that if it is possible for you to stand up now, please. And as we're going to move, we're going to ask you to also move to the same places as we're going to do it. And another thing that we can do as we're saluting is that we can open our hands and wave our hands this way to open to this beautiful sacred energy that life is. So please, let's start by looking to the east, which is on this direction. Por favor. So we are saluting to the rising sun, to the divine, precious child, to the generator of life, to the one who reminds us that the main task that we came to complete on this beautiful life is to be here and now. So for these teachings, for this opportunity to be enjoying this beautiful day, we salute to the solar fire serpent, ECTMIH2023. Let's go. Now we turn to look to the south. This is the place of the warriors, warriors of light, the place of will and power, who reminds us that doesn't matter the obstacles that we could find on our path, we always keep on going forward, because the only way we know, it is victory. So for the sacred winds, for the healing air, we salute you, precious bird. Bolon ik kantan pixoy. Now we turn to look to the west. This is the place of women, the sacred waters. So this is the renewal place. And for all this love that comes from this feminine, sacred, divine, which makes possible for all of us to be here and now, we salute to the divine, feminine, sacred energy coming close to Mother Earth. So, we salute you, beautiful grandmother, Black Jaguar, Xbalamte. Now we turn to look to the west. to the north. It is the place of the ancestors to where we are all going. Sooner or later, and we are always praying, asking for it to be on a late and healthy way. So for this beautiful heritage that you left to us as our traditions, we salute you, beautiful grandfather Kawil, the smoking mirror. Now, we're going to point to the center. For the ones who is possible, if you can, you come close to the earth. For the ones you can, you just can salute like this, okay? But we come down, please. Then, we salute to the one of the unconditional love, the precious one, the generous, the healer. We are asking you, beautiful mother, forgiveness for all this damage that we provoke in you, just by our thoughts, our actions, our omissions. We ask you to stop justifying ourselves behind our ignorance, our negligence, our violent thoughts. So we are asking you, beautiful mother, to provide us with the right guidance to live in accordance with your natural law. Because as we follow your law, so we know that we can reach the individual health. And from individual health, we can make peace prevail over you. So please keep blessing us and keep showing us the right way and the power to continue this battle that we are facing in your name. It is to you, beautiful mother, ich hun ahau na ich hun kan tonatsi. Now we stand up. And now we raise up our hearts to the source, to the place where all comes from. It is beyond our thoughts, beyond our conceptions, beyond our beliefs. So that we know that we are just like mirrors projecting the light back to the center and being very, very grateful for this opportunity to be witnesses of this wholeness of existence. So we are here with grateful hearts to salute you, heart of the sky, Kaan Poxikal. And now, on regard of our hearts, we salute to the center in which the human being lives. Just by reminding that we carry all the answers within our hearts. Doesn't matter how far we go, trying to find these answers, but we always need to come back to the center here. And to remember that the base of every answer is this word, Jakum, which means love. This is the reason why we are here. And knowing that we all carry this flame within our hearts, we salute you, and we salute this beautiful tribe family among us for this flame. So thank you very much for being here, and now, beautiful sacred beings. Jumbotik, gracias. Have a great journey.
Muchísimas gracias, Adrián. and very special guest, Hilda. Thank you for this very special, grounding, and opening welcome to the conference. Who here had ever started a congress with a Mayan ceremony? Show of hands. I see some people. I like that. From now on, I want to start every congress like this. So welcome to the session on climate justice. My name is Nori Spouwen, and I'm your moderator for this morning session. I'm a former diplomat and human rights lobbyist at the UN, and I'm now the founder of Embassy of Change. I have to say I'm really quite impressed with this room here today. Not just the beautiful musical hall that we have, but especially the audience, the people that we have. Look around you and imagine what we could do if we could combine all the wisdom and knowledge and experience that we have here today. We could probably solve most of the global issues. Unfortunately, that's not possible yet. So we'll have to really make use of this Congress here and share as much knowledge as we can. And when we talk about planetary health, I have a question for you. If the planet was your patient, what would be your diagnosis? The World Health Organization has already said that the climate crisis is now the biggest threat to global health. So we are here today because we need a new way of science. And planetary health is exactly that, a new way of doing science, of looking at the interconnectedness of the natural world and our health and well-being. But planetary health is more than a way of doing science. It's also a social movement, and you're all part of that social movement being here today. And I think planetary health is also an invitation. It's an invitation to look beyond your little square meter, your specialization, your hospital. And I think that Adrian and Hilda showed us that it's also a spiritual message. Because what we are doing to the environment, we are doing to ourselves and each other. Now, in this first session on climate justice, we'll give you a taste of the depth and broadness of the issues that are at hand. All the different ways that people around the world are affected by the climate crisis, and the deep underlying injustice in who is affected by and who is causing these crises. And we'll have amazing speakers from Uganda, Mexico, India, Bangladesh, and the Netherlands. And they will give us some pieces of the puzzle that we need to be laying in the next few days. They will show us how much we have to learn from each other. And they'll teach us how to take future generations into account in our care for the world. And I think their stories also really show us that there is no time to waste and that we all have a role to play. And I want to invite you to not only bring your scientific, rational self here today, that I know all of you have, but also, and maybe more importantly, your human self, your beating heart, your creativity, and your sense of purpose. I think Adrian and Hilda really helped us bringing that part of us to the room here today as well. And in order to transform regular health into planetary health, we need new storytellers. And our first speaker today is that very special kind of storyteller. Ruben Terlou studied medicine, but instead of becoming a doctor, he decided to leave to China, learn Mandarin, and started taking pictures. He is now a renowned documentary maker who won the Silver Camera for his work, and his documentary series, Dr. Ruben, is now airing on TV. Ruben will take us on a trip and share some powerful images of climate injustice around the world. Please join me in welcoming Ruben Terlou.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction and for the honor of being given the chance to speak here before this beautiful crowd. That's really an honor. Actually, I can't believe I'm standing here. I grew up in this town. This is my hometown. And Tivoli, when I was young, was like this, you know, a big name and a big room. And now I'm here. And I'm giving the chance to talk to you, a group of talented and dedicated, idealistic and humanistic people. And I think we do share the same values, and that's why I'm really honored to talk to you today. We live in important times. We live in important times because our planet is undergoing a rapid transformation. An unwanted transformation, I would say. Unwanted transformation because it's endangering nature and animals and our species, humans. And I've been traveling for 20 years, and I've seen countless times the devastating effects of climate change and also environmental degradation and injustice. And I've witnessed countless times what that does to people in countries all over the globe. And these experiences have actually transformed me. It's become more difficult to get back home, to come back to the Netherlands and to see, you know, how good everything works here and the immense luxury we're living in. It's become more difficult. And today I'll take you on a trip around the globe to those people, the frontiers of climate change, to the voices and to the places that I've witnessed, to show you the various layers of injustice that are being done or are at play, I would say, all over the globe. And also what I wanted to tell you is that when you talk about climate change, often we actually tend to talk about this in terms of, you know, the future. We like to say, yeah, it's coming towards us. You know, it might be bad for our children. But actually, I really, after what I've seen, I really believe this is misleading sentiment. It's happening here and now. We're already there. It's not coming towards us. We're in the middle of it. And already we have been for quite some time. So we humans are incredibly good at transforming our planet, right? And that could be hopeful. Do you actually know that as recent as the year 1800, there were only 1 billion people on this planet? And now, over 2 centuries later, it's 8 billion people. 8 billion. 1.4 billion people live in China. This is the Pearl River Delta, the factory of the world. 66 million people live there. And I've witnessed in China, I've spent many years there. I went there 20 years ago. I've spent about 5-6 years in China. And I've witnessed this rapid industrialization and urbanization of this country. Take, for example, this vast flat expanse like this area that you see here. It was created by digging away 700 hills or mountains to create a space for a new multi-million city. It's just to show you how able people are to change the environment, to change our planet. And I've seen how the countryside is being engulfed by these big cities, these growing cities, the urbanization. And our people are pushed away from the countryside, from the traditional grounds where they're living. And I documented the mental impact of these developments as well. The loss of social cohesion, the loss of family ties, and also the loneliness that people feel, both the young people, the new generation, and also the elderly people, because they don't really recognize the area or the society where they live anymore. They're like, they feel lonely. They don't feel connected to the earth, to other people. And lots of people struggle with this. This is also planetary health. The mental part of it, the mental yeah, I would say, just look at this, maybe you get it then. We are developing at breakneck speed. Breakneck speed. The outdoor air pollution that we are living in is taking 4.2 million lives a year. This is according to the global study of disease, 4.2 million lives. 1.6 million lives in China only. This is one of the biggest risk factors for death globally. I still remember the code red days where the highways are closed and the schools are closed in China because of the air pollution. You could hardly see 50 meters. This is happening in India a lot as well. This is challenging for humankind, big time. China, because I know a lot about China, I talk a lot about China, but of course, it's not just China that's responsible for the greenhouse emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, right? But China is producing and consuming more coal than the rest of the world combined. And this has big impact on traditional societies. And I would say it has a lot of, it's maybe ironic even, that many of the people and communities that are most vulnerable to climate change and environmental degradation, they are actually already excluded from global economic activity. They were never included in the first part. Because look at, for example, these Mongolian nomads. They're living right next door to those vast open pit coal mines that I just showed you. These Mongolian nomads, they're breathing the coal dust every day. And it's not just that. Also, their traditional grazing grounds for their herds, they're collapsing. Huge sinkholes are destroying their grazing grounds because the groundwater is disappearing. When you look at this photo, you see a wounded horse. But it's kicking up dust. It shows the desertification of those Mongolian steppes, the grasslands. So here you see already 3 ways in which these people are struggling. And what have they ever done to contribute to the climate change? Nothing. They just had some cattle and their yurt. People are incredibly inventive. This is the good part, right? So we are building, for example, hydropower dams to generate green electricity. This is great, potentially, of course. China has mastered this craft. It is building dams all over the planet. This is the Three Gorges Dam, but it's building dams in Ecuador, Ethiopia, Laos, to make Laos the battery of Southeast Asia. But it started doing lots of damming also on the Mekong River in China itself. This is an interesting aspect because downstream from those dams are 5 countries: Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. And the people on the banks of the Mekong River, they're dependent on the Mekong for their livelihoods. But China regards the water from the Tibetan Plateau as a sovereign source and not a shared one. And the dams, they create stagnant water, fish are dying, no oxygen. And the people in downstream countries are suffering. And of course, climate change makes water an even scarcer resource. China itself is struggling with drought, heat waves. These are activists. They used just to be villagers in Thailand. I visited them last year. And I still remember vividly the meeting with Mr. Ban, one of the fishermen I had. He took me on the little boat on the Mekong River. And then he started reminiscing about his past and remembering how he grew up with his grandfather who taught him fishing. And he cried. And then what he did was something I'll never forget. He washed away his tears. He dried his tears with the water of the Mekong. I'll never forget that. It made a deep impression on me, like when I went to Madagascar and I saw elderly people, like really old people, struggling with the shortage of water, picking cotton. And not just elderly people, also small kids. They were working there as well, in the cotton fields. They were earning less than $1 a day. And their lives are becoming even harder. These encounters really transformed me. And also they made me angry. A few months ago, I was in the Amazon rainforest, destroyed by gold mining and logging. Of course, we all know the rainforests, these are the lungs of the earth, right? And it was there that I couldn't help but wondering, will my daughter, in her time, will there be enough rainforest left? And that brings me to a really important aspect, to the younger generation. This we should really recognize. The younger generation, they will suffer more than us, from the climate change, this injustice, right? But they have contributed least to the rising temperatures. This is something to think of, this injustice. And when I traveled to Pakistan last year, you might be thinking, this guy is traveling a lot. Well, that's true. I am. When I was traveling to Pakistan last year, I went to the Karakoram and the Himalaya. I was just talking about the Tibetan Plateau. And when you take these regions together, the Tibetan Plateau and the Karakoram and the Himalaya, this is a region that's also called the third pole, because the ice caps, they hold the largest reserve of fresh water outside of the polar regions. This is a very important region, but also it's warming up rapidly. So I went to northern Pakistan and I saw villages swept away by the floodwaters because of rising temperatures and quickly melting glaciers. I met these girls and I had a conversation with them about what it meant to their lives. And I want to take you to that place and time. So please bear with me and have a look what they said. Everyone is afraid, they said. I could really feel that there and then. Everyone is afraid there. So we talk about it, we read about it, but these people, they feel it. And it takes away their motherland. It takes away their safe roof. And I want to stay in Pakistan with you guys. And I traveled further south. We're talking October 2022. So like a bit over a year ago. And I traveled to Sindh, a region in the center of Pakistan. And there had been one of the worst natural disasters in the history of Pakistan, and the worst flood ever in the history of Pakistan. Because the Indian Ocean seawater is rapidly warming. And this, in combination with a terrible heat wave, this produced a meteorological phenomenon called thermal drag. And basically it meant very heavy monsoon rains and the worst terrible flooding ever. And this was also one of the costliest natural disasters in the world. The damages were estimated $30 billion. 30 billion. Over 2 million people were left homeless. 1 million cattle died. Millions of houses destroyed. And I still remember driving for 2 full days through a region the size of the UK, only seeing submerged land. 2 full days. The scope was immense. And this disaster laid bare the geographical dimension of climate change and climate injustice. I talked about the younger generation. I talked about the marginalized communities. Now we're talking about geographical areas, countries. Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gases, but it's one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. The Pakistani authorities, they also called upon the West. They said, hey, come on. You guys should take responsibility for what's happening to us. You know, because you are responsible for most of the historical emissions. Historical emissions speaking, I think 25% Europe, 25% US, and the other half is for the rest of the world combined. And I want to take you to this flood that I witnessed. And I want to show you how deeply this affects the life of people and the different levels and how it also brings disease. This will be a little longer, this piece. But I think this, to see this and to appreciate it fully, it's very important to show all of it to you guys. So please travel with me to Sindh, October 2022. So that's it. My time is up. But I think your time is also up. The planet is sick and we need to treat the illness. And I think we medical professionals or doctors, we are able to recognize disease. And that brings with it a responsibility. So I want to give it back to you guys. It's time to act. Let's go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben, for this really quite moving address. I was looking at your new documentary series, Dr. Ruben, and in it you have a really beautiful conversation with the famous Dr. Mukwege, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in Congo with women who survived sexual violence. And in that conversation, you ask him about his motivation for the work. And then he says, I think that we doctors see things that other people don't see. And I was wondering, what do you think is that unique perspective that doctors have?
I think being a doctor, it means that you're compassionate. It means that you look at with empathy towards the other. It's a kind of view on humanity, I think, that's very, very important to have this compassion. But on the other hand, I also think that doctors are quite analytical. So that's why I just said, we doctors, we recognize illness when we see it. And that's what I do in my work, because I believe that the stories that people tell me are symptoms of underlying maybe a disease or a development or a theme. So I think the way I make documentaries is the way a doctor looks at a patient. But my patient is society or the planet. So yeah, I think that's how I interpreted what Dr. Mukwege told me. Yeah.
So we have a room full of health professionals, medical professionals here today. Do you think that this unique perspective also brings with it a unique responsibility to play a role in these big issues?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think definitely. That's why in my address I also said it's not coming towards us, it's already here. And I think we medical professionals, we should be able, or we are able, to recognize that. When you saw this scene just now in Pakistan, you see the people, they lose their crops, they lose their houses, but you see the struggle with various forms of injustice. They are poor, so they can't buy medicine. They are victim of this climate change. So, you know, that's why they get these diseases. There's so many ways in which they are becoming victim. We can analyze that. And we should be ringing the bell, or we should even take action, because we, better than maybe other people, are able to recognize it.
Yeah.
So it does bring a responsibility. It's too easy to just treat a somatic illness. There's a whole role for us out there that goes beyond that. Otherwise, we can't fix this.
Mm. Well, thank you for this really strong call to action, and we'll see you back in the panel discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you, guys.
Now, our next speaker is Professor Gupta. She is currently the Professor of Environment and Development in the Global South at the University of Amsterdam and the Delft Institute of Water Education. She's also a research leader of the Global Change Institute. Now, Professor Gupta really has a dazzling track record. She specialized in international law at Harvard, worked at the Dutch Ministry for Environment, was a lead author for the IPCC and won a Nobel Peace Prize in that capacity alongside Al Gore. And in her work, she shows how climate change has a disproportionate impact on countries in the Global South, even though they play a very small role in causing it. And in her address to us today, she will go into safe and just planetary boundaries. The floor is yours, Professor.
I'm going to talk about healthy planet, healthy people, and I'm going to move on to how living within safe and just Earth system boundaries requires Earth system justice. So if you look at the recent report of the Global Environment Outlook, number 6, I was the co-chair of this. It's called Healthy Planet, Healthy People. And basically, it tells you the story that a healthy planet and a healthy people, that narrative is interrelated. And if you look at what is actually happening to people today, then you can see that almost 25% of deaths and morbidity are caused by environmental issues, and this excludes climate change. So we're talking about air pollution, which causes 7 million deaths per year. In your figure, you were talking about air pollution, which is outdoor. This figure includes indoor air pollution. Water pollution kills about 3 million people per year, but by 2050, we expect that it will be the major cause of deaths worldwide. If you look at loss of biodiversity, 60% of infectious diseases are zoonotic diseases, which come from nature. We have loss of ocean fisheries that affect about 1 billion people. Land degradation affects about 3.4 billion people. So I'm giving you sort of the numbers, the story, and the pictures you just saw before. Above that, we have displaced people, people who are moved out of their areas because there's no water, the soil is degraded, and so on, or because of climate change, or because of floods. And so essentially what you're seeing is that we have a massive, massive global impact, which some people think can be around $1.4 trillion worth of negative impacts. Now, in the Earth Commission, where I'm also co-chair, there we sat and looked at Earth system boundaries. So what are the natural boundaries for the survival of our Earth? And when we looked at the safe boundaries, we looked at a number of issues. On climate change, the number was 1.5 degrees centigrade, because beyond that, we trigger four tipping points, and beyond those tipping points, the climate becomes completely and totally unstable. Now, if you look at the others, for example, water, groundwater, you should not take out more water than you actually recharge, and worldwide, we are taking out a lot a lot of groundwater for our agricultural systems, and so on. If you're interested, I can go into more details, but basically we came up with safe boundaries. Now, a safe boundary is a boundary beyond which the system collapses. But is that boundary just? And so what happened is we looked at the safe boundary of 1.5, and we tried to see how many people will suffer from this. And you can already see that at 1.5, 200 to 500 million people worldwide will suffer from only one aspect, sea level rise. And there are many, many other aspects, for example, rising heat. And we took, for example, the concept of wet bulb temperature, which is probably something you're more familiar with than most of my other audiences. And we see that already at 1 degree centigrade, tens of millions of people worldwide will die if the temperature rises beyond a certain amount. And so we found that in our conscience, it was not possible to allow hundreds of millions of people to die worldwide because of climate change. And we drew the line at 1 degree, and we said 1 degree is more just than 1.5. And this has been now published in Nature. But the question is not that the global community should try to now get to 1. The problem is we should try to get to 1.5. And what we can see already is we've only got 7 or 8 years to get to 1.5, and then the window has closed and we have passed 1.5. So there's no sense of urgency in, for example, the Dutch elections that are supposed to take place tomorrow. There's no sense of urgency anywhere in the world regarding climate change, even though every day on CNN, you will see floods somewhere in the world, and you will see droughts, forest fires, even in Canada, as a consequence of climate change. But, and I'll come back to this in my last slide, why did the global community not fix on a number much earlier? Why did it take them 15 years to come to 2 degrees, and then the small island states and the least developing countries forced the rich countries to adopt 2 degrees, but if possible, as low as 1.5 degrees. And even 1.5 degrees is not good enough to save human lives, or, in fact, biodiversity. And today, climate change is a driver of damage in all other systems, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, all the rest. And that is one of the reasons why we asked for 1 degree centigrade. So then we looked at all the boundaries that have been created by the natural scientists, and we tried to examine each of these boundaries on the grounds of, are they just enough? Now, if you look at the aerosol boundary at global level, it does not reflect the air pollution deaths that are being caused at local level. So we asked for an air pollution target, which made the aerosol boundary more stringent. And in nitrogen, the impact of nitrogen on water causes eutrophication much later than it damages the water for drinking water purposes. And so the amount of the boundary for nitrogen was made more stringent. Now, these are sort of technical numbers for you, but basically what I'm trying to say is somehow the scientists have told us that we should not cross the system beyond which it becomes unstable, but we need to think about the boundary beyond which the system becomes harmful for humans and all other non-human species on Earth. But this is the next question. Have we breached these boundaries? Now, the yellow ball in these pictures shows you where we are today. The green area shows you the safe and just area. The red one shows you the safe boundary, and the blue shows you the just boundary. And what you see is that everything has been breached except for the aerosol boundary at the global level. That means we're outside the boundary. That means we have to get back inside the boundary. That means drastic transformation of the way we all live, especially in the global north. And I'm not sure that we're ready for it. And if you look at this at local level across the world, then you find that at least 2 of these boundaries have been transgressed in every area in this map that is not white. so from yellow onwards. And the darker the color becomes, the more boundaries that have been crossed in those areas. And that clearly shows you that the Himalayas would be very badly affected, and that was clearly evident in the video film just before. And that means that 86% of the global population is at present affected because these boundaries are being crossed, and that is around 52% of the world's land. Now, we've all crossed the boundaries, but we have not yet ensured that people across the world have access to food, water, energy, and infrastructure. So what we did was a thought experiment. In the year before COVID, we tried to examine what would happen if all humans who are below the poverty line are given access to food, water, energy, and infrastructure. And these are the results. So the blue area shows you the current emissions of all people in relation to various elements. The bottom one is climate change. The orange area shows you what would happen if you gave all human beings a dignified life. That is a certain minimum amount of resources. And if you have escaped from poverty, that's the pink area. That's the extreme, that's the area that would be the additional pressure from giving the people below the poverty line this kind of access. Now, I'm talking about 3 bulbs and a refrigerator. I'm not talking about much. Or a house the size of a parking lot per person. Now, you were talking about population in your narrative, and perhaps you will also agree and say, well, look, that's the problem is there are too many people on Earth. Maybe, but actually it is the top 4% that emits as much as the pressure of all the people below the poverty line to get them to having just 3 bulbs and a refrigerator. So it's a massive degree of inequality in the use of resources that we have today. And this comes in addition to what we earlier said. So we're already outside the boundaries. So if you want to meet the SDGs, then you're going to go even further outside the boundaries unless you drastically change the way we all live. And that's basically where the story is today. We are outside, we're the yellow circle. The red one is the safe boundary. The blue one is the green boundary. Now, that shows you what space there is. And then we did another exercise. What would happen if we gave all human beings on Earth 3 bulbs and a refrigerator? And by using that, we made the bottom. That's the minimum access foundation. And then that gives you the amount of space that's left to share between all of us. So that's a sort of a theoretical exercise, but basically, the message that comes out of this research that we've just been publishing in the Earth Commission is that we have to massively change the way we live. Now, to come back to climate change, on which I have worked for the last 30 years, I'm only going to show you one slide. Why is climate change a story of injustice? The first story is that the target has been delayed for 25 years. So in 1990, the negotiations began. In 1992, the Climate Change Convention said you must stabilize greenhouse gas emissions at a decent level. Wasn't specified what was the exact number. And IPCC and Dutch scientists and scientists from America, everybody was giving ideas about the need to try to reduce emissions. They said that from 0 to 1 is green, beyond 2 it's red, and 1 to 2 is orange, which is very dangerous in some parts of the world. IPCC reports have been saying that all along. And yet, it was impossible to get the countries of the global north to agree to a target till 2015. And in 2015, the global north was willing to go to 2 degrees, and it was because of the massive pressure from the global south countries that they agreed to say to go to 1.5. But yesterday's newspaper says that we are moving towards 2.7, 2.8 if we are lucky. That means you're going to miss the 1.5 target by a huge amount. So somehow, none of our politicians anywhere in the world are taking this seriously. And that is really, really worrying. So that's the first major injustice in this process. And it's particularly unjust because the scientists on climate change come primarily from the north. And they have been giving this data, but the northern governments do not wish to accept this. Let's talk about the second thing. Once you have a budget, it's like a cake. Then you have to share the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that countries can emit. This was discussed in 1990. It was discussed in 1992. And in 1992, it was agreed that rich countries would take action to reduce their emissions first and make space for developing countries to increase their emissions. In the process, rich countries would also develop new technologies, and they should share these technologies with the global south. Also, because this was caused primarily by rich countries, there were certain requirements for providing assistance to developing countries to cope with the problem. But sharing the budget. We started with sharing the budget. In 1992, it was very clear that the Climate Convention should include a division of targets, but in the ultimate version of the convention, the US government and the UK government sat together and changed the article, and now people will tell you there's no target in the 1992 convention. Then we had the Kyoto Protocol, which did have targets for rich countries, but the US and Canada did not adopt them. So between the years 1990 to 2020, the US and Canada did not take a legally binding target on climate change at all. That's over a period of 30 years. The European Union did take targets, but that's a longer story, and I'll come back to that. And instead of now a principled approach to deciding who should have targets to reduce emissions, now it's gone to voluntary. Let everyone do what they want. And even though it is voluntary, President Trump decided to get out of the Paris Agreement. Even though now Biden has come back in, but who knows who wins the next elections in the United States. Then we come to the instruments. There were many, many instruments that we could have chosen, but we chose market-based instruments. So basically, rich countries were investing in mechanisms in the global south to reduce emissions there because it was cost efficient for them. But in doing so, they stopped investing in new technologies within their own countries. And as a consequence, today it's much more difficult for them to actually reduce their emissions. Stranded assets. Now, basically, an asset that you cannot use becomes a stranded asset. 70 to 80% of the remaining fossil fuels in the world is in the global south, is with the 150 developing countries. But they are being basically asked not to use those fossil fuels. So this becomes a stranded asset for them, while we have all become very rich using fossil fuels, and we continue to use fossil fuels, new fossil fuels in the global north. In terms of impacts, well, you've given a very good story about the impacts worldwide. Ultimately, the problem before us is not a problem just of climate change. It's a problem of the way in which we run our economy, the way in which we focus on GDP, the way we say that low-income countries should become middle-income countries, should become high-income countries, which basically means that they're all trying to make cars and roads and things. And probably the future should be one without cars. And I think this just gives you a small taste of the large injustices in the climate change system. And I think the biggest injustice today is that no one is willing to actually declare an emergency on climate change to make sure we achieve the 1.5 degree centigrade goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I want to invite you to be a part of our fireside chat. Thank you for this very urgent message. And I would like to invite all the rest of our speakers for the panel, the fireside chat. So Hilda Flavia Nakabuye, Mohammed Nadiruzzaman, and Adrian Chopin. And Dr. Ruben, if you want to join us, you're very welcome. So we call this a fireside chat, but we were actually forbidden to make an actual fire. We did ask, but that was a bummer. Because of all the wood, they said, you know.
Well done.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us here today. For the sake of time, I think it's good to dive right in. Hilda, maybe you want to start. You come from Uganda, and you have started the Fridays for Future movement there. Maybe you can take us with you on how that journey started for you.
Okay, so I come from a farmer's village in the basin of Lake Victoria, from a country that has been devastated by climate change, that is Uganda. My country is the 12th most vulnerable country to climate change and the 49th least prepared country to combat these effects. I grew up in a farmer's village where food, agriculture, and livestock was our life, was our backbone, was everything that we had, until when I was 10 years, I started experiencing the differences in our climate, which I didn't know by then, because climate change is not a topic that is taught in schools in Uganda. So at age of 10, our family's plantation was devastated by strong winds. We had heavy rains, which took about 3 days. And one morning, we found one garden that bent looking at one side, and all the crops were bent. We couldn't bring back anything to life. And this was a turning point in our life because we used to have 6 meals a day, but they all started to reduce to 4, to 3, to 2, to 1. All our streams dried out because of the dry spells. And I remember a time when it rained and I couldn't even go to school because the roads were submerged and houses were all broken down. I remember a time when I had to miss school because of these floods, when other kids were going to school. But because our plantation was our backbone and we had lost it, my parents couldn't support my tuition fees. So I had to sit home even for more days, and that year I remember I didn't study until my dad moved to the town, to the city, and changed a job. He became a mason in a construction industry, and that's how I was able to go back to school. And when I joined university, I learned about climate change from a local non-government organization that came to our school. And from this time, when I learned that the effects that my parents, my community were experiencing were because of climate change, I realized that this is vital information that everyone in my generation and in my country needs to know about. I started to create climate awareness on the streets, in communities, in schools, everywhere, to the extent that my fellow students called me Madame Climate. We traversed Uganda's schools creating awareness and starting up environmental clubs in schools. So I started this journey alone. When I had my first strike outside my university, none of my friends wanted to join me because it was so embarrassing. And as I speak right now, we have a movement of over 54,000 students and youth in Uganda. We work in 72 communities, and we have a network of 102 schools.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you.
So I love how you are linking the lived experience and the climate knowledge, awareness, and creating a movement there. How do you see the international movement, so international activism and linking with the people who are here, for example? What is the importance of that for you?
For me, it looks like we are responsible, especially the young generation, the youth. When I look at my country's population, 51% is youth. We are the biggest population, and it's very visible with the world. Most of the population is young people. So as youth, we have a very big responsibility to play in combating climate change, since we have a future ahead of us. And as human beings on this planet, we also have a responsibility, because the youth are right now paying for the effects that they didn't cause. And it's the reality to many countries in the global south. They emit very little and they bear the burden of climate change. So I think we need to work together. This is a time where humanity comes to the same level of understanding. We need climate action like never before. We are in an emergency, but we are not acting like one. Greta Thunberg, a Swedish climate activist, once said that our house is on fire. Let's act like it is. We have seen what floods are doing in Pakistan, in other countries in Bangladesh, and the same reality is in Uganda. We have seen wildfires. We have seen the Amazon burn down. These are the lungs of the world. What are we waiting for? What more alarm do we want to get to know that we are in an emergency?
And do you feel like the countries that are causing most of this climate change, do they feel the urgency? Do you see that people take this responsibility?
If they were, we would notice. I think Dr. Ruben, and we would know that they are taking, but we are ringing the same alarm. That means there's not enough that is being done.
Right, yeah. Well, that's a strong call to action, I think. Thank you very much. Let's go to Mohammed Nadiruzzaman. Nadir, welcome. Happy that you could join us. So you are a human geographer.
Yes.
By training, and have started to work together with health researchers quite recently, a couple of years ago. Can you take us with you on your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for inviting me. And I had a small city tour in the morning without realizing that the venue is just close to my hotel. So I went to the UMC and came back. Anyway, but that was part of my geography training, because everyone says that when I'm a geographer, I'm very good at maps, and I made it. And when you talk about geography, and particularly human geography, this is more like a potato. It goes with any curry, and that's why I work with health now, and mainly on environmental planning and health at Maastricht University. But when you talk about justice, particularly on this case, I think that I have a very strong take in terms of understanding the justice itself, because as we have seen the presentations, that when we talk about justice, it is more divided by global north versus global south, the poor versus rich. But that is, in my way, in some way important in terms of how you allocate the resources and distribute this thing. But in other way, it is super problematic, because you really just disappeared the essence of justice in this whole process, because you do not look into climate change much more critically. I come back from one of the articles which came out in 1976, the year I was born, by Professor Phil O'Keefe, who passed away a couple of years ago, with Ben Wisner and other colleagues. And that paper talks about taking natureness out of disaster. And the point is, or even a couple of months ago, there was another article by Ilan Kelman, and that says that an earthquake doesn't kill people, but a faulty design does. So when we try to understand climate change, I understand about the emission and everything, but being someone from Bangladesh who lived in a village for 8 months and worked as a school teacher to understand how people experience a cyclone in a coastal village, I have a completely different take on that one. The way I see it is that, for example, there was a paper came out in 2012 and that was a product of a PhD from Imperial College London. And that paper talks about how climate change has been impacting the preeclampsia. And they surveyed on 1,200 pregnant mothers in the coastal areas. But they articulated climate change, attributed climate change to salinity. And now, if we look into the history of salinity in Bangladesh, that connects Dutch land and Bangladesh together, because we same with the same physiographic environment, the same deltaic environment, and also many of our water infrastructures, they were built by Dutch. So we have a very deep connection in terms of water management since 70s. And what we see that if we see the history of salinity in Bangladesh, the salinity was 0.5 to 1 ppt back in late 60s, early 70s. But salinity jumped to 13 ppt within 5 years, right after implementing Farakka barrage. So that is a barrage in upstream which pull out water and let the salt water seep in. So the salinity was 13 ppt in late 70s, which failed the entire crop in that area. And then in 78, shrimp farming was declared as an industry in Bangladesh. So a lot of people with money from the cities, they pour into the village and buy those lands, evicting people from those lands, implementing the shrimp farming, letting the more saline water come into the land. The salinity was been 20 ppt by 2009. And at the same time, the Dutch embankments, which was being built to protect the land, they were so porous because of those shrimp farmers that a very weak cyclone really toppled the embankment, and that made the entire area inundated for 2 years. And now we see that salinity is between 22 ppt. Now, if we try to give contribution to sea level rise, to weather variabilities, and to all other causes, we see that sea level rise and weather variability has very little stake to all this rise of salinity. It was mainly because of our action, and this is very much between rich and poor, which often been missed. So understanding climate change and then understanding the environmental degradation is very important when we try to connect them with science, and that really talks about the justice, because if we see the justice part of it, we see that in 2021, I was leading a conference back in Hamburg where I was working that time. And there I invited 3 lead coordinating authors of IPCC. Professor Salimul Haq, he was my mentor, writer from a PhD. Professor Coco Warner, she is now working with IOM. She was at the UNFCCC at that time. And Professor Jakob Reiner, he is now the director of Resilience Alliance in University of Bonn. And I was asking the same question to all of them. Let's agree that we all comply with Paris Agreement, we all comply with the Loss and Damage Fund and everything, and the rich countries, particularly the top 22 emitters, they agreed to give us the money. Does it guarantee that the money is going to reach to that poor in my country? Professor Salimul Haq, he bypassed the question because he is a Bangladeshi by born and he understands the situation. Coco Warner, she was also one of my mentors in my first postdoc, and she said that this is very sad, but UNFCCC doesn't have any jurisdiction in the national boundary. So, I mean, this is so problematic that when we talk about justice, we only talk about North versus South, but that is not the justice. I mean, this is more about rich and poor, and all the knowledge constructed on climate change in Bangladesh, we really do not talk about those failures. We do not talk about the government's responsibility to it. We do not talk about the bilateral water sharing part of it. We all talk about the political part of the climate change itself, and that really dilutes the whole justice thing. And that will never come up until we agree on those justice and we talk for the poor.
Yeah. Well, thank you for pointing out the layers of injustice, and that it's not just about global north, global south, but that in the local context there are power dynamics and injustices as well. I want to ask on behalf of the audience, what can the people here, the health researchers, the medical professionals, learn from this, and what should they, for example, do differently when they are working in a local context?
Well, one of the things is that the way it grows is we often challenge our knowledge and it grows. There is one thriving area of knowledge is locally led adaptation. So understanding the locality, this is often problematic because often local itself could be a way of, being centralizing the whole narrative. But again, being local is more connecting to the local people. There is a center called GCA, which was Ban Ki-moon Commission before, for adaptation, the Global Commission on Adaptation. The headquarters is in Rotterdam. They are promoting the locally led adaptation now. I think that is one of the ways forward if you follow systematically all the 8 steps and theories of locally led adaptation. That could be one way of, learning from the local experiences and giving back to them some of their rights and justice and what they deserve.
Yeah, I think we can work with that. Thank you so much, Nadir. Adrian.
Yes.
Hola.
Hola.
Adrian Chopin is an indigenous Maya elder from Mexico, Yucatan region. And you have a story to tell us about a beautiful, rich, green area and a train.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. I guess that we really hadn't suffered too much of lack of any kind of natural resources in our lives because we were living with one foot in paradise. But, well, from about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, there were big corporations trying to build a train in there. But it was always stopped by the opposition, by activism. But with the arrival of the nowadays government, they reached into the power with a lot of support in there. More than anything else, for us it was like a punishment vote from people against the last kind of people. And then with this support, they started to take decisions from central Mexico without really consulting to the people what it is needed in our communities. And the main decision that they had is to build a train on a really fragile ecosystem. We say that we live with one step on paradise because we have a lot of water, underground water, on karstic terrain. We don't have hills or mountains. So because the karstic terrain, it is so porous, when it rains, the water filters into the underground. But these are underground rivers. We have the biggest flooded cave system on the world down there. It's about 400 kilometers, and it is just the biggest. But the whole peninsula, it is the same way. The train is about to run 1,500 kilometers, the most part of it over this kind of environment, in which it's not possible to know what's going on down there because it is an underground river, so it is changing. The kind of terrain it is very easy to solve with the running water, so you cannot see what's happening down there. And so that's the way how, on natural ways, these beautiful spots that we have of water that we call cenotes, they are like the underground caves, underground rivers that they just collapse, and then they let us access to those beautiful places. It is a beautiful area. But then when they decided to start to build the train, they really didn't make any study. They didn't do any really consultation to the people. It is totally out of the standards, even with the agreements that Mexican government signed from years ago with the World Work Organization. They are totally out of standards, and with no studies and without really telling the people what's the bad part of it, of building the train in there. Also, even if it is very dangerous, we never know where it will be collapsing. But as the ecosystem is very fragile, so it is very easy to be polluted. Mm-hmm. And one of the points is that besides of those studies, without them, They also mention in just one single but mistaken story that it doesn't matter if they commit ethnocide with the project, because they're going to substitute it with ethno-development. So this is the point in where we are seeing how they are destroying a lot of archaeological vestige that it is on the jungle, buried by the jungle yet. It is said that they are taking the Mayan heritage on a way it didn't happen since the colonial times, the first time of that. And also what's going to happen with the access of water, and how we're going to attract even more hurricanes to our areas. We know that the hurricane, the only need that it needs to get power is heat on the ocean. And we are seeing how they are killing just on our area, on the east coast of the peninsula. They have killed even more than 6 million trees in there. So it is senseless. Who needs to kill trees now? No? And it is, you know, we in part of our work that we do, we practice this kind of ceremonial, spiritual sauna that we call temazcal. It is a very beautiful part of our culture. But so we are so many colleagues in there that we are used to work with heat, you know. Last summer, I met with some of them on the city, in Tulum City, and we were having a lunch. But the radiation that came from the street, from the forest, was too much. We were sweating. We were trying to take out our clothes in there, and you know, everybody was like, ah. And we were like, okay, listen to me, because we were discussing what was going on with the train, and it is changing. The temperature is higher now. You can feel it because the trails are not really far. And it is like, okay, we are temazcaleros, I mean, this kind of ceremonial people, but I feel it is hot. It is hot. How can we hold it? And it is for a really long, long period of time. So everything is changing in there. And we are making this call to protect what is really essential, which is life, share the trees, our jungles, our forests. So many things to say, you know, from everywhere. But we really know, and it is what I was mentioning last week in Brussels, that we also saw a very powerful hurricane arriving into the Pacific coast of Mexico.
Yeah.
And it took strength in a really powerful and fast way, and destroying, devastating a lot. It is an emergency area there.
Yeah.
And for the first time, as we have a hurricane culture, we feel afraid and worried, because what's coming now, and it is, as it was mentioned, it is happening right now.
Yeah. I think we should all be really grateful. I read somewhere that indigenous people are just 2% of the world population, but you protect 80% of the biodiversity on this planet. And I wanted to ask you, what is the central piece of wisdom that you want all the people here to take with them?
That we are children of Mother Earth. That we are not, in any way, we are not a total different thing. That Mother Earth is a living being as we are. So if we observe our bodies and even our smaller toe on our feet, it's broken, so it affects the rest of the system. So we never consider ourselves as the dominant species of it, the owners of the land. And every single step that we do, we have to consider that life is so precious, and that we are here just in one lifetime opportunity. So we have to be totally aware of all our actions and thoughts.
Thank you so much. Well, I could listen to you for hours and hours. I see that our time is up, so I want to really thank you for joining us here today. Nadiruzzaman, Adrian Chopin, Hilda Nawakuye, Ruben Terlou, and Professor Gupta. Thank you very much.